The star that the Calibrant Ascendancy had named Ninth Anchor was gone, and Fleet Surveyor Heshran Alk was the first of the Armada to understand that a human hand had moved it. He did not understand it the way a child understands a fact. He understood it the way a body understands cold water, all at once, in the skin before the mind. The Armada had folded into the marker volume on schedule. 1,100 warships of the Ascendancy, the largest survey fleet ever assembled, hung in a perfect lattice across 900,000 kilometers of empty dark. Every hull was where the charts said it should be. Every gun was loaded. Every officer had slept the regulation rest. The Ascendancy did not lose battles because the Ascendancy did not fight battles. It charted them, and then it arrived to a victory already written. For 4,000 years that had been enough. Heshran stood on the survey bridge of the flagship index of the true sky and watched the long board where the local sky was drawn in cold blue light. Ninth Anchor should have been a steady amber point at the center of the board, a yellow star with 2 charted worlds, the rally beacon for the whole campaign. The amber point was not there. In its place was a smear of corrected data, a gray nothing, a region the instruments kept trying to describe and kept failing. A star does not simply leave. Heshran knew the mathematics of every way a star could die, and none of them were quiet, and none of them were quick, and none of them left the rest of the sky untouched. Ninth Anchor was simply absent, the way a word is absent from a sentence when a careful hand has lifted it out. He had drawn the chart of Ninth Anchor himself, 11 days before, on the long fold-out from home. He remembered the figures. A yellow star of ordinary mass, 2 charted worlds, neither inhabited, a stable 0.3 light-years from the nearest trade lane. He had marked it as the rally beacon precisely because it was so ordinary, so fixed, so reliably itself. A rally beacon must be a thing that does not change, a thing every captain in the Armada can find with closed eyes, a thing that will be exactly where it was put. He had chosen Ninth Anchor because nothing could move it. He understood now that he had chosen wrong about the only thing that mattered, that there was a power within reach of this volume for which the immovability of a star was not a fact but a request, and that the request could be denied. "Resurvey," he said. His voice did not shake. That was a small private victory, and he held on to it. "Full sweep. I want the anchor star located and its drift logged before the Tribune asks." The survey officers bent to their boards. Heshran was calibrant to the center of himself, and a calibrant believed that anything real could be measured, and anything measured could be owned. He had measured 1,100 worlds in his long life. He had drawn the orbits of 3 suns that the Ascendancy then moved closer together to warm a frozen colony. He had personally recharted a whole spiral arm so that the trade lanes ran straight. The Ascendancy did not conquer with fire. It conquered with cartography. It redrew the map of a region until the old map, and everyone who lived by it, simply stopped being true. That was the weapon. That was the whole terrible elegance of it. The Calibrant fleets did not destroy your world. They recharted the space around your world until your sun was in a different place. Your seasons broke. Your tides drowned your cities. Your sky became a sky you had never seen. They unmade you by making the universe slightly, fatally other than the one you were built for. 600 species had been recharted out of their own lives this way. None had ever returned fire because there was nothing to fire at. You cannot shoot a map. And now Ninth Anchor, the Ascendancy's own rally star, the fixed point at the heart of its own campaign, had been lifted out of the sky like a stitch from cloth. "Surveyor." The voice belonged to Oltan, his youngest reader, 300 years his junior, and still able to be afraid out loud. "The star is located." "Where?" 40 light minutes. "Coreward of charted position." "It is moving, Surveyor. The anchor star is moving, under power." The bridge went very quiet. Stars do not move under power. That was not a law of the Ascendancy. That was a law of the universe, and the universe did not break its own laws for anyone. Heshran crossed to Oltan's board and looked at the impossible thing for himself. The amber point had been found again, far from where it belonged, and it was sliding through the dark at a rate the board kept rounding up because it did not believe its own measurement. Something had taken hold of a yellow sun, a thing 800,000 times the mass of a world, and was towing it through space, the way a tug tows a barge. "What is doing that?" Heshran said. It was not really a question. He already knew, the cold water way, that whatever could tow a star could also fold the Armada into paper. "There is a contact," Oltan said, "at the star, between us and the star. It was not on any chart. Resolve it." "I am trying, Surveyor. The instruments will not hold it. Every time I fix the contact it recharts. It is gray." It does not answer the survey ping. It is approximately 3,000 meters along the long axis, and it is— Oltan stopped. His reading arms had gone flat against the board, the posture a young calibrant takes when the numbers stop making sense. "Surveyor, it is one ship. One ship." 1,100 ascendancy hulls hung in the lattice, and 40 light minutes ahead of them a single gray vessel was towing their own rally star out of their own chart, and it had not asked permission, and it had not announced itself, and it had not appeared on any survey the Ascendancy had ever taken of this quarter of the galaxy. This region was supposed to be empty. The chart said empty. 4,000 years of survey said empty. There was no power here. There was no border here. There was a notation in the deep archive, an old one, a careless one, a single line that the cartographer priests had written and then never thought about again. Heshran had read it as a cadet and laughed at it the way one laughs at a superstition. The line said, "Region unsurveyed by request. Do not chart. Reach is held." Held by whom, the line did not say. The Ascendancy had taken it for a clerical error, a blank in the map, a place no one had gotten around to owning yet. Heshran had personally proposed this campaign to fill that blank, to run the trade lanes through it, to plant the anchor star and rechart the whole quarter and add it to the true sky. The Tribune had approved it in 9 seconds. Easy ground, empty ground. A blank waiting for the pen. The blank, it seemed, had a fleet. "Hail it," Heshran said. Oltan sent the survey ping, the Ascendancy's first word to any new thing, the polite, cold tone that meant "We are measuring you now, and you will be ours soon." It went out on every band at the speed of light, and the Armada waited the 40 minutes for it to arrive, and the 80 minutes for an answer, and the answer, when it came, was not words. The answer was that ninth anchor stopped moving. The gray ship set the star down, gently, the way a worker sets down a load that is not his, in a place that is not where he found it, because he is done carrying it and he wants both hands free. Then the gray ship turned and faced the Armada, and Heshran Alk, who had measured 1,100 worlds and feared none of them, felt the survey bridge tilt under him, though the deck had not moved at all. "Surveyor," Oltan whispered, "there are more of them." "Where?" "Everywhere we are not looking. Every time we rechart the empty volume around the fleet, the empty volume is less empty. They were here before we arrived. They have been here the whole time. They let us fold in." Oltan's voice climbed. "Surveyor, the lattice is surrounded. We have 1,100 ships. The blank has— how many?" Oltan could not say it, so the board said it for him, in cold blue light, a number that climbed and would not settle, because the instruments still did not believe what they were counting, and would not believe it until it was far, far too late. The number settled at last on 6. 6 gray ships, ringed around the 1,100 at a distance of 1 light minute, perfectly placed, perfectly still, and the instruments flatly refused to call that an estimate. There could be more. The instruments could only promise that there were at least 6, because the empty dark around the Armada kept resolving into more hull the longer anyone looked. 6 against 1,100. Heshran made himself say the ratio aloud, because saying a ratio was a calibrant prayer, and it usually steadied him. 6, he said. We outnumber them 183 to 1. It did not steady him, because a thing that can tow a star does not count. He turned to his command tier. Tribune Sael must be woken. The Tribune is awake, said a new voice, and the chamber chilled by an honest degree. Tribune Sal Coram entered the bridge in her cartographer priest grays, her 4 eyes already fixed on the long board, and she had clearly been awake for some time, because she was not surprised. That was the worst thing Heshran saw in the whole first hour. The Tribune was not surprised. "You knew," Heshran said. One did not say such things to a Tribune. He said it anyway. The archive knew. Sael did not look at him. "Reach is held. I read the line before we folded. I judged the risk acceptable." Her voice was the flat instrument voice all the priests cultivated. A blank held by a power that never charts, never trades, never answers, and never expands in 4,000 years, is a power that has chosen to be small. I did not expect it to be empty. I expected it to be weak. On the board, the gray ship that had carried the star sat motionless, facing them, saying nothing. "It moved a sun," Heshran said. "Yes." For the first time, something moved behind the Tribune's flat eyes. "And it set it down again. That is the part that frightens me, Surveyor, and you have not yet understood why." She turned to him fully. "A power that could move our rally star could have left it where it could not help us, could have dropped it into a fold, could have flung it through the lattice. It did none of that. It carried the star a safe distance, set it down gently, and turned to look at us. Do you understand what that is?" Heshran did not. "It is a demonstration," Sael said. "It is showing us its hand and choosing not to use it. That is not the behavior of a frightened small power. That is the behavior of a thing so far above us that it can afford to be polite." She faced the board again. "We have folded 1,100 warships into the front yard of something that rearranges suns for practice, and it is being courteous to us. I would very much like to know why." Heshran found that he would like to know why too, and that the not knowing was a kind of physical pain, an itch in the part of his mind that had spent a long life believing that everything could be measured and owned. A memory came to him then, unwanted, the way the worst memories always arrive at the worst hour. 400 years before, on a campaign he had been proud of, he had personally recharted a world called Semit's Landing. It had been a small green world with a single ocean and a people who fished it, and the Ascendancy had wanted the system for a trade junction, and Heshran had been the surveyor who drew the new sky. He had not killed anyone. That was the doctrine, that was the elegance. You never killed anyone. He had simply redrawn the space around Semit's Landing until its sun stood 11 degrees off where it had always stood, and the tides answered the new geometry the way tides always do, and the single ocean rose, slowly, over the course of one season, and took the fishing towns one by one. He had watched it from orbit on his survey board. He had logged it as a successful correction. He had folded home and been commended. He had not thought about Semit's Landing in 300 years. He thought about it now. He thought about the fishing people who had looked up one morning and seen their sun in the wrong place, and not understood, and had no one to fire at, because you cannot shoot a map. He thought about how they must have felt in the last season, watching the water climb, knowing something had moved their sky, and not knowing what, or why, or who. And he understood, looking at the gray ship that had carried a star and set it down gently, that the Reach had felt about the Ascendancy exactly the way the Ascendancy ought to have felt about itself, and never had. He pushed the memory down. There was no room for it on a survey bridge, but it did not go all the way down, and it would not, for the rest of his long life. He stepped to his board. "Then let us measure it," he said. "Full survey of the gray hull. If it can be charted, it can be answered." He poured the Ascendancy's whole instrument might at the single gray ship, every survey band, every measuring grace the cartographer fleets had refined over 4,000 years. The beams crossed the light minute and struck the hull, and Heshran watched his board to learn the truth of the thing. His board learned nothing. The gray ship took the full survey of the largest fleet the Ascendancy had ever flown, and it returned no chart at all, not a refusal, not a shield, worse. The survey simply found nothing to hold. The instruments that had measured the mass of suns ran across the gray hull and slid off, the way a hand slides off wet glass, and what came back was a single flat reading that Heshran had never seen any object in the universe return. The reading was, present, nothing else. The ship was present. The instruments could confirm that a thing was there and could confirm nothing further about it. No mass, no drive signature, no hull composition, no crew count, no name. The most measuring power in the galaxy looked at the gray ship as hard as it could look at anything, and the gray ship looked back and gave it the one word it could not argue with. Present. It is unsurveyable, Oltan breathed. Nothing is unsurveyable, the Tribune said, but she said it quietly, the way a priest says a creed she has begun to doubt. And then the gray ship spoke. It did not speak in the survey ping. It did not speak on any band the Ascendancy used. It spoke, impossibly, in the private command channel of the flagship index of the true sky. The channel that existed only inside the hull, the channel that no signal from outside could possibly reach, because it was not a signal, it was a closed loop of wire that ran through the Tribune's own quarters and nowhere else. The gray ship spoke on the inside of their flagship, and it spoke in the high tongue of the cartographer priests, the dead ceremonial language that only 40 living beings could read, the language the charts themselves were written in. It said, "You have come to draw a blank. The blank is full. Set down your pens and turn around, and not one of you will be lost. This is the only courtesy. There will not be another." The bridge did not breathe. Heshrin looked at the Tribune. The Tribune looked at the board where the gray ship sat, present and nothing else, a thing that had reached through solid hull and a closed wire, and 4,000 years of secret language to set a single sentence down inside their skulls. "How?" Oltan said. "How is it inside the hull?" "It is not inside the hull," the Tribune said. "It is inside the chart." She had gone the gray of old paper. "We did not survey it. It surveyed us. While we poured every instrument at it and found nothing, it read the whole flagship down to the priest tongue in the wire. It let us measure it and learned us in the same instant, and we learned nothing and it learned everything, and it has just told us, in our own holy language, to put down our pens and go home." He had spent 1,100 worlds and 4,000 years on the single faith that to measure a thing was to own it, and a gray ship had just turned that faith inside out. It had let itself be measured and stayed unowned. It had measured them and owned them entirely. It had spoken to them through their own closed walls in their own secret words, and then it had offered them, with a patience that was somehow worse than any threat, the chance to simply leave. "We do not leave," he heard himself say. The Tribune looked at him. "We are the Ascendancy," Heshrin said, and his voice found its old iron, because the old faith was the only floor he had left to stand on. "We have folded 1,100 warships into this volume. We have spent the campaign's whole budget to be here. If we turn around because one unsurveyable hull spoke a sentence in our wire, then the blank stays blank forever, and every blank in the true sky learns that it can hold the line by frightening us. We do not leave, Tribune. We chart. We redraw the volume around the gray ships until their drives have nothing to push against, and their position has nowhere to be. We do to them what we have done to 600 peoples. We rechart them out of the sky. Self. It was the calibrant answer. It was the only answer the Ascendancy had. And Tribune Sael Korim, cartographer priest, keeper of the true sky, looked at the gray ship that had set a star down gently and spoken in her own dead language, and she made the choice that 4,000 years of victory made for her. "Begin the rechart," she said. Heshrin turned to his board and began the largest cartographic working the Ascendancy had ever attempted. The rechart was not a weapon in the way the lesser species thought of weapons. There was no beam, no fire, no shot. The 1,100 warships of the Armada were not warships in that sense at all. They were survey vessels. Each one carried an instrument that did not measure space so much as insist upon it, that reached into a volume and redrew the relationships inside it, that told the gravity which way to fall and told the distances how far to be, and told the local sky a new and binding truth about itself. Pointed at a world that working drowned cities and broke seasons and moved suns. Pointed at 6 gray ships in open space. It should have folded the volume around them into a knot. It should have told the dark between the hulls to become a wall. It should have recharted the gray ships into a pocket of space that did not connect to anywhere, a drawn cage, a place on no map, from which no drive could push because there was nothing left outside to push against. Heshran had done this to fleets before, smaller fleets. He had watched proud little squadrons of the lesser species fire their guns into a recharted volume and watch the shots curve back, watch their own drives strand them, watch their sky fold shut around them like a closing hand. It was the cleanest weapon ever built, because it was not a weapon, it was a correction. You did not kill the enemy. You simply drew a map in which the enemy had no room to be, and the enemy obligingly ceased. 1,100 instruments lit at once. The working was vast. It reached across the light minute and took hold of the volume around the 6 gray ships and began, with the patient certainty of 4,000 years, to redraw it. And the volume would not be redrawn. Heshran saw it on his board before any officer reported it. The rechart went out, strong and true, the strongest working he had ever conducted, and it reached the gray ships and it simply did not take. The map he was drawing slid off the volume the way the survey had slid off the hull. The gray ships sat in a region the ascendancy was insisting did not connect to anywhere, and they connected to everywhere anyway, calmly, as though Heshran's enormous working were a child's drawing held up against the real sky. "It is not taking," Oltan said. "Surveyor, the working is the strongest on record, and it is not taking. The volume around the gray ships will not rechart. It is as though the volume is already drawn, as though something has already charted it, harder than we can, and our working is being written over a map that will not erase." The blank was full. Heshran understood it then, fully, the cold water way and the slow way both at once. The region had not been unsurveyed because no one had gotten around to it. The region had been unsurveyed because someone had already surveyed it, completely, down to the last meter, and had drawn it so hard and so finely that no other hand could redraw it. The blank on the Ascendancy's map was not an absence. It was the one place in the galaxy where someone else's map had won. "Tribune," he said, "we cannot rechart this volume. It is already held. The notation was not a clerical error. It was a property line. We have folded the Armada into a region that is, in the only sense that matters to us, already owned, more completely than we have ever owned anything." Tribune Sael Korim stood very still, and then, because she was a priest and not a fool, she did the thing that no Calibrant tribune had done in 4,000 years. She walked to the survey board, opened the command channel, the real one this time, the one that went out, and she spoke to the gray ship. "This is Tribune Sael Korim, of the Calibrant Ascendancy," she said in the high cartographer tongue. "I withdraw the rechart. I acknowledge that this region is held. By whom is it held? What are you? What is the name of the power that draws a sky no hand can erase?" The 40-minute silence that followed was the longest of Heshran's long life. Then the gray ship answered, on the channel that went out, in the high tongue, and its voice was even and unhurried and almost gentle, the voice of a thing that had all the time there was. "We are the Reach," it said. "We do not chart your sky. We do not move your suns. We do not redraw your worlds. We were asked, a long time ago, to hold one region and leave it unmarked, so that a small and broken people could heal in a sky no empire could rearrange. We agreed. We have held it since. We hold it still." "A small and broken people," the Tribune repeated. "They were recharted," the Reach said, and for the first time, something moved under the even voice, something old and very cold. "Long ago, before your ascendancy was a thought, a power much like yours found their world and redrew the space around it until their sun stood in a stranger's place, and their seasons broke, and their oceans climbed their cities. That power did not kill them. It simply drew a map in which they could not live, and then it sailed on, and called it correction. We found the survivors adrift in the wreck of their own sky. There were 9,000 of them. We took them in. We asked them what they wanted. They asked for one thing only. They asked for a sky that no one could ever redraw again. The bridge listened. Every officer, the tribune, Heshrin, who had recharted a spiral arm and called it trade. So we gave them this region, the Reach said. We charted it so hard and so completely that no working in the galaxy can erase it. We drew their sun, a place it can never be moved from. We drew their seasons, a law that cannot break. We made them a single small corner of the universe that is, finally, permanent. And then we held it. We have held it for a very long time. We will hold it for as long as there is a Reach. And you, Tribune, have folded 1,100 warships into it, carrying the one instrument we exist to refuse. Heshrin felt the floor of his faith give way entirely. You came to do to this region, the Reach said, the exact thing that was done to those 9,000. You came to redraw a sky that broken people were promised would never be redrawn again. You poured the largest rechart on record into the one volume in the galaxy where recharting is not permitted. You have not yet understood what you have done, so I will say it plainly, in your own holy tongue, the way you say things you intend to keep. Say it, the Tribune whispered. You have declared war, the Reach said, on the only people in the galaxy who decided, a long time ago, that no one would ever move a sun again, and we keep our promises. Set down your pens, turn around. This is still the only courtesy. The window for it is closing as I speak. Heshrin looked at the board. The 6 gray ships had not moved, but the dark around the Armada was no longer resolving into 6. The instruments, freed from the failed rechart, had begun at last to see what had been there the whole time, and the number on the board was climbing again, and this time it did not stop at 6, and it did not stop at 60, and Heshrin watched it climb and felt the last of his certainty go out of him like air from a cut. Tribune, he said, the window is closing because they are letting us see the rest of the Reach. The number stopped at 4,000. 4,000 gray ships, where a moment before there had been 6. They had not arrived. They had not folded in. They had been there the entire time, inside the held volume, drawn so far into the permanent chart that the Ascendancy's instruments had simply read past them, the way an eye reads past a word printed in its own background color. The Reach had let the Armada see 6. Now it let the Armada see all of it. 4,000 gray hulls, each one present, and nothing else. Each one unsurveyable, each one ringed around the 1,100 Ascendancy warships, in a lattice so calm and so complete that Heshrin understood the Armada had never, from the first instant of the fold, been anything but inside a closed hand. Heshrin watched the number sit there on the board, 4,000, steady, refusing to climb any higher and refusing to fall, and he understood that it had stopped, not because the instruments had finished counting, but because the Reach had decided that 4,000 was enough for them to see. It was not showing them everything. It was showing them exactly as much as the lesson required, the way a teacher writes one hard number on the board and lets the students feel it before adding the next. There could be more gray ships beyond the 4,000. There could be 10 times as many. Heshrin would never know, and he understood that the not knowing was itself part of what the Reach intended, that a power which shows you 4,000 and lets you wonder about the rest has taught you a deeper fear than a power which shows you everything at once. They were never outnumbered, Oltan said. He had stopped being able to keep the fear from his voice. We were never the larger force. We have been the smaller force since before we arrived. We folded into the center of them, and we called the empty space around us our victory, and it was their formation the entire time. 183 to 1, Heshrin said softly. He had said the ratio as a prayer. Now it came back to him inside out. We had it backward. We never had it at all. Tribune Sael Korim stood at the survey board and looked at 4,000 gray ships, and Heshrin watched a thing happen to her that he had never seen happen to a cartographer priest. He watched her recalculate her entire life in the space of a breath. 4,000 years of ascendancy doctrine, of the true sky, of the faith that to measure was to own, leaned over the edge of her 4 eyes and did not fall, because she caught it, because she was strong, and she turned to Heshrin with the look of a leader who has decided to survive. We accept the courtesy, she said. We withdraw. Sound the fold-out. Take the Armada home. The blank stays blank. I will answer to the tribunate for the lost campaign. We are leaving. It was the right order. It was, Heshrin would think later, the only right order anyone gave that day, and it came 1 minute too late, because while the Tribune had been recalculating her life, the voice of the tribunate had been doing something else. The voice of the tribunate was not a person. It was a function, an old and jealous one, the cartographer priest's final authority, a circle of the most senior priests who flew in a sealed ship at the rear of every campaign and answered to no fleet commander, not even to the tribune. They existed to ensure that the ascendancy never showed weakness, never withdrew from a blank, never let a single region resist the true sky and live to teach others to resist. They were the doctrine made flesh, and the doctrine did not permit retreat. The voice had heard everything, the Reach's words, the tribune's order to withdraw, and the voice of the tribunate, in its sealed ship, had decided that a tribune who withdrew from a blank was a tribune who must be overruled, and it had quietly, without telling the bridge, begun to do the one thing the Reach had warned them never to do. It had begun a second rechart, a deeper one, not aimed at the gray ships, which had proven they could not be redrawn, aimed instead at the held region itself, at the permanent chart. The voice had reasoned, with the flat cruelty of pure doctrine, that if the gray ships could not be erased, then the thing that made them strong could. Erase the held chart, erase the permanence, break the promise that no hand could move that sun, and the Reach's whole advantage would unravel, and the broken people sheltering in their unbreakable sky would find, after a very long time of safety, that their sky could break after all. The voice aimed the deepest working the ascendancy possessed at the small charted sun that the 9,000 survivors had been promised would never move again. Heshrin saw it on his board, as a second working bloomed past his own withdrawn one, larger, hungrier, reaching not for the ships, but for the star. "Tribune," he said, and his voice cracked for the first time in 400 years. "The voice has begun a working. It is not aimed at the fleet. It is aimed at the sheltered sun. They are trying to break the permanent chart." "Stop them," the Tribune said, already moving. "Cut the voice. Override. They will get us all killed." "We cannot override the voice," Oltan said. "By doctrine, the voice answers to no one. The working is already at half strength. Tribune, they mean to break the promise. They mean to move the sheltered people's sun." And Heshrin, who had spent his life believing that the universe could be owned, watched the Calibrant ascendancy, in its last act, aim the very crime it had been warned against at the one sun in the galaxy it had been begged to leave alone. He understood, in that moment, that the ascendancy was not going to die because it was outnumbered. It was going to die because it could not stop being itself. The Reach answered before the working reached the star. It did not answer with fire. Heshrin had braced, despite everything, for fire, for the 4,000 gray hulls to open up and turn the 1,100 into light. There was no fire. The Reach answered the way it did everything, with a chart, drawn so fast and so finally that Heshrin's instruments registered it as a single event with no duration at all. The deep working that the voice had aimed at the sheltered sun simply stopped existing. Not blocked, not deflected. The Reach reached into the working itself and redrew it, and where there had been the largest rechart the voice could produce, there was now nothing, a corrected blank, a thing lifted out of the sky like a stitch from cloth. The working that could move a sun was undrawn in the time it took Heshrin to blink, and the broken people's star sat exactly where it had been promised it would always sit, untouched, unmoved, permanent. And then the Reach did the thing that ended the ascendancy, and it did it so gently that Heshrin did not understand at first that it was the end. "You have spent your courtesy," the Reach said, "on every channel now, in the high tongue, and in the low, and in the private wire, and in the survey ping, and in 100 languages. The Armada did not know it knew. You reached for the sheltered sun. We told you that was the one thing we exist to refuse. Now we will show you what it means to be recharted by someone who is better at it than you are. We will not harm a single crew. We give you our promise. The same kind we gave the 9,000, and we keep our promises. But your armada will not draw another sky. The 4,000 gray ships lit, all at once, not with weapons but with the working, the chart, the insistence upon space that was the Ascendancy's own holy craft, turned now against its makers. 4,000 permanent charts reached across the volume and took hold of the 1,100 Ascendancy warships, and Heshran felt his own flagship become, in an instant, a thing on someone else's map. The Ascendancy recharted its enemies into pockets of space that connected to nowhere. The Reach did something stranger and worse. It recharted every instrument in the Armada into a thing that could no longer insist upon space at all. Heshran watched the survey board of the index of the true sky go dark, not broken, not burned, simply corrected, redrawn into a board that displayed only one reading, the same reading the gray ship had given the survey an hour before. Present. The flagship was present, nothing else. The Reach had taken the Ascendancy's whole measuring craft, its 4,000-year faith that to measure is to own, and it had drawn the Armada into a sky where the Armada could measure nothing, own nothing, chart nothing, move nothing. It did not kill them. It unowned them. It gave 1,100 cartographer warships the one experience their entire civilization had been built to inflict and never to suffer. It made them a blank. The instruments, Oltan said, and there was something like wonder in his terror now. Every instrument in the Armada. They are not destroyed. They are corrected. We cannot survey. We cannot rechart. We cannot fold. Surveyor, we cannot read our own position. We are present, and nothing else. How long? Heshran said. Until they release us, the Tribune said quietly. She had stopped trying to give orders. She stood at her dark board with the calm of a priest who has finally met the thing her religion was always secretly about. We are charted, Surveyor. The way we charted the 600. The exact way. The Reach has drawn us into a sky where we have no room to be anything but still, and it has not killed one of us. She let out a long breath. It is more merciful than we have ever been, and it is more final. We will sit here, present and nothing else, until a power that rearranges suns decides what to do with the people who came to break its one promise. The voice of the Tribunate, in its sealed ship at the rear, tried one last working. Heshran saw it bloom, smaller now, desperate, the doctrine refusing to the last to admit that it had lost. The Reach undrew it before it was half-formed, casually, the way a reader corrects a child's spelling, and then it spoke to the voice directly, alone, on the voice's own sealed channel, so that the whole Armada heard the answer but not the question. No, the Reach said, you do not get to break it. That was the entire point. That has always been the entire point. There is one sun in this galaxy that no power can move, and there will go on being one, and the people who shelter under it will go on healing, and you will go home and tell the Tribunate that the blank is held, and that it was always held, and that the holding is not unkind, and that the only people who ever die at this border are the ones who reach for the sheltered sun. Now be still. And the voice of the Tribunate was still. The bridge of the index of the true sky was silent. 4,000 gray ships held 1,100 dark ones in a sky that none of the dark ones could read. And Heshran Alk, fleet surveyor, stood at his corrected board and felt, for the first time in his long measured life, the thing the 9,000 survivors must have felt when their stranger's sun rose in the wrong place. He felt unowned. He felt unable to insist upon his own space. He felt like a blank. He did not like it, but he understood, standing inside it, that he had spent 4,000 years making other people feel exactly this, and calling it correction, and sailing on. Surveyor, Oltan said softly, the gray ship, the first one, the one that carried the star, it is hailing the flagship. Only us, only you, me. By name, Surveyor. It is asking for you by name. It says, Oltan listened, and his reading arms went still. It says, it has read the whole campaign log. It knows you proposed this campaign. It knows you wrote that the blank was empty, and the ground was easy. and it says it would like to show you something before it lets you go home." Heshrin looked at the Tribune. The Tribune looked back, and there was no order left to give, because they were present and nothing else, and the only choice any of them had left was whether to look at what the Reach wished to show them. "Open the channel," Heshrin said. The channel opened, and the gray ship sent Heshrin a chart. Not a working, not an attack, a chart, the simplest possible thing, a drawing of a small region of space, the kind of thing a cadet made in his first year. Heshrin's corrected board could not survey, could not measure, could not own, but it could receive, and the Reach sent a picture of a sky into the one dark board left on the flagship, and let Heshrin Auk look at it. It was the sheltered region, the held volume, the permanent chart, drawn from inside, the way the people who lived there saw it. And Heshrin, who had drawn 10,000 skies, looked at this one and felt his throat close. There was the small charted sun, yellow, steady, fixed forever in a place no working could move. And around it, two worlds, charted just as permanently, their orbits drawn in lines so final they looked carved. And on the nearer world, where the chart showed cities, the Reach had marked something Heshrin had never seen on any survey he had ever read. It had marked the living, not as population, not as a number to be owned. The chart named them. Each settlement carried its own small name in the survivor's own tongue, and beside each name, a single mark that Heshrin slowly understood was a count of generations. The 9,000 who had been pulled adrift from their broken sky were marked at the bottom, the first generation, and the chart climbed from there, generation upon generation upon generation, 200 of them, the broken people healing in a sky that could not be redrawn, until the number of the living at the top was not 9,000 any longer. It was 400 million. They were 9,000 when we found them, the Reach said, gently, only to Heshrin. We gave them a sky no one could move. We held it. We asked nothing, and they did what living things do when they are finally allowed to be still. They grew. There are 400 million of them now, Surveyor, on the two worlds under the sun you came to break. They have never seen a rechart. They have never lost a season. They have never watched an ocean climb a city. They do not know your ascendancy exists. They sleep tonight under a sky that has not changed in 200 generations, because 6,000 kilometers away, 4,000 gray ships have stood watch over an unmarked border for longer than your civilization has had a name, and they have never once been thanked, because the entire point is that the people they protect never know there was anything to be afraid of. Heshrin looked at the chart of 400 million sleeping lives and could not speak. The Reach let him look longer. It zoomed the chart, gently, the way a patient teacher turns a page, and Heshrin saw the settlements come closer. He saw that they were not just names. The Reach had charted the harbors, the small ones, hundreds of them, where the people fished an ocean that had never once climbed its shore. It had charted the planting lines on the second world, the long even rows that only grow where a season has never failed, where a farmer can put a seed in the ground in the certainty that the same sun will be in the same place when it comes time to take the grain back out. It had charted the roads between the towns, worn smooth by 200 generations of feet that had never once had to flee a rising tide or a broken sky. It had charted, on the night side of the nearer world, the small steady lights of cities that slept, and Heshrin understood that it was night there now, that 400 million people were asleep at this exact moment, children and elders and everyone between, breathing slow in the dark, while 6,000 kilometers away, an armada that did not know they existed had aimed the largest working on record at the one thing that kept them safe. He thought of Semit's Landing. He thought of the fishing towns that the ocean had taken, because he, Heshrin Auk, had moved a sun 11 degrees and logged it as a correction. The two charts sat side by side in his mind, the one he had drawn and the one he was looking at, the world he had drowned and the world he had nearly drowned, and he understood that they were the same world, that they had always been the same world, that every blank the ascendancy had ever called empty had been someone's harbor and someone's planting line and someone's small steady light in the dark. They were 9,000 when we found them, the Reach said, gently, only to Heshran. We gave them a sky no one could move. We held it. We asked nothing, and they did what living things do when they are finally allowed to be still. They grew. There are 400 million of them now, Surveyor, on the 2 worlds under the sun you came to break. They have never seen a rechart. They have never lost a season. They have never watched an ocean climb a city. They do not know your ascendancy exists. They sleep tonight under a sky that has not changed in 200 generations, because 6,000 kilometers away, 4,000 gray ships have stood watch over an unmarked border for longer than your civilization has had a name, and they have never once been thanked, because the entire point is that the people they protect never know there was anything to be afraid of. Heshran looked at the small, steady lights of the sleeping cities and could not speak again. You wrote that the blank was empty, the Reach said. You wrote that the ground was easy. You proposed to run trade lanes through it. Through them, you were one working away, an hour ago, from moving the sun of 400 million people who have never harmed you and whom you did not even know were there. The voice came that close. We let you see how close, because you are going home, and someone among you should carry the truth of what nearly happened, and the Tribune will report doctrine, and the voice will report nothing, and so it must be you. Why me? Heshran managed. Because you are the one who believed the blank was empty, the Reach said. And a man who learns that a blank was full of 400 million sleeping lives is a man who will never draw an empty blank again. We are not punishing your armada, Surveyor. We are correcting it. There is a difference. Your people forgot it. We will help you remember. And then the Reach released them. It happened the way everything the Reach did happened, all at once, with no duration. The corrected boards of 1,100 warships came back to life. The instruments could survey again. The drives could fold again. The Armada could read its own position again. The Reach undrew its hold on the Ascendancy as cleanly as it had drawn it, and gave them back their whole craft, undamaged, every hull whole, every crew alive, every gun still loaded and never fired, and now never to be fired. Heshran stared at his restored board. 1,100 warships, intact. 4,000 years of doctrine would have read this as a deliverance, a survival, a thing to fold home and call a near miss. He knew better now. He understood that the Reach had given them everything back precisely because taking nothing was the most complete answer it could give. It had let 1,100 warships come to the very edge of a crime, shown them the 400 million they had nearly murdered, held them helpless for 1 hour so they would feel exactly what they had spent 4,000 years inflicting, and then handed them their whole fleet back, untouched, and said, "Now go home and be different." "It spared us," Oltan whispered. "All of us, the whole Armada." "It did more than spare us," the Tribune said. She had been watching the chart of 400 million lives over Heshran's shoulder, and her 4 eyes had changed, and Heshran saw that the cartographer priest, who had folded in believing the blank was weak, was not the being who would fold out. "It refused us. There is a difference, and I did not understand it until this hour. We have spent 4,000 years destroying peoples. The Reach has just spent 1 hour refusing to destroy us, and the refusing was more total than any destruction we ever managed. We came to erase a sky, and we were not even allowed to die for it. We were corrected and sent home like cadets who drew on the wrong board." She let out a long breath. "We will not speak of this as a defeat to the Tribunate. The Tribunate will not understand the word. We will speak of it as the only thing it was. We met the edge of the true sky. The edge has a keeper. The keeper is kind, and the keeper is final, and the keeper has been holding one sun still for 400 million sleeping people since before we learned to draw, and we are going to leave it alone forever." But the voice of the Tribunate, in its sealed ship at the rear, was not finished. Doctrine does not learn. That is its strength and its sickness both. The voice had been overruled, undrawn, made still, shown the 400 million, given its whole ship back, and the voice, processing all of it through the single flat lens of 4,000 years of never withdrawing from a blank, reached one final conclusion. It concluded that an enemy who returns your fleet undamaged is an enemy who lacks the will to destroy. It concluded that the Reach was bluffing. It concluded that a power which protects 400 million sleeping lives is a power that can be made to surrender by threatening them. And the Voice, alone, against the Tribune's order, against the Reach's mercy, against everything the hour had shown, fired the one weapon on the entire armada that was not an instrument. The Voice's sealed ship carried a relic, a single physical weapon, ancient, forbidden, kept against the day a blank could not be charted. It was a starbreaker, a bomb that did not redraw a sun but simply ruptured it, a thing the cartographer priests had built in their cruelest century and never used, because the ascendancy did not destroy, it corrected, and a starbreaker was a confession that some things could not be owned. The Voice had kept it, the Voice had brought it, and the Voice, in its last act, launched the starbreaker not at the gray ships, which could not be harmed, but at the small yellow sun of the sheltered people, to prove that the Reach could be made to kneel by threatening the 400 million it loved. Heshran saw it leave the rear of the formation. He saw the relic fire of it, the one true weapon in a fleet of charts, streaking on a fold line toward the sun that 400 million sleepers had been promised would never move. "It has fired the Starbreaker," he said, and his voice was not a surveyor's voice anymore, it was just a frightened person's. At the sheltered sun, the Voice has fired on the 400 million. The Tribune lunged for the channel. "Reach. The Voice has acted alone. We did not. Stop it. You have to stop it." "We know," the Reach said, and Heshran understood, in the held breath before the end, that the Reach had known the Voice would do this, had known there would be one weapon that was not a chart, had known that doctrine does not learn. The Reach had returned the Armada whole and shown them the 400 million and made its mercy total not because it was naive, but because it wanted every officer on every bridge to see, with their own eyes, exactly who fired the last shot, and exactly what the Reach did about it, so that no one in the Ascendancy could ever tell the story wrong. The Starbreaker crossed the volume on its fold line, and the Reach, without hurry, without anger, with the same even gentleness it had shown all day, reached out and drew one last chart. It did not stop the Starbreaker, it recharted its destination. Heshran watched the fold line of the relic bend, smoothly, finally, away from the sheltered sun and onto a new heading, a heading the Reach drew for it in the time between two heartbeats, a heading that ran back along the exact line the weapon had come, to the one place in the volume that had launched it. The Starbreaker, the Ascendancy's single true weapon, the confession the cartographer priests had carried for 1,000 years, turned in the dark and went home to the sealed ship of the Voice of the Tribunate. "No," the Tribune breathed. "It is not us," Heshran said, understanding. "It is only the Voice. It is recharting the weapon back onto the only ship that chose to use it. It is not touching the rest of us." "It is." The Starbreaker reached the sealed ship of the Voice, and the Voice of the Tribunate, which had never withdrawn from a blank, which had kept the one weapon, which had fired on 400 million sleeping lives to prove that mercy was weakness, met its own relic, and was gone. One ship, a single point of light, brief and white and final, at the rear of the formation, and then nothing. The doctrine made flesh, undrawn by the weapon it had carried for 1,000 years, on the heading it had chosen itself. The 400 million slept on under a sun that had not moved. "It took only the Voice," Olton said into the silence. "Only the ship that fired. The relic came back to the hand that threw it, and touched nothing else. Surveyor, it returned our own weapon to us, and let us choose where it landed, by choosing who fired it. And we—" He stopped. "We are still 1,100. We are still 1,100. Minus the one ship that reached for the sun. That is the whole of it," the Tribune said. She stood very straight. "That is the entire teaching. The Reach does not punish the Armada. It punishes the Reach. The single hand that reaches for the sheltered sun dies, by its own weapon, on its own heading, and not one other soul is touched. We could fold out right now, every remaining hull whole, and the only price the Ascendancy will ever pay for this campaign is the one ship that could not stop being cruel." She closed her 4 eyes. It is the most exact justice I have ever seen. We deal in correction. We have never once been this precise." The channel opened a final time, and the Reach spoke to the whole armada, gently, the way it had spoken from the first. "Go home," it said. "Tell them the blank is held. Tell them why. Tell them about the 400 million, if they will listen. And tell them about the voice, if they will not. We take nothing from you. We want nothing from you. We have wanted one thing for a very long time, and we already have it, and it sleeps tonight under a steady sun. Do not come back. There is no glory here, and no easy ground, and no empty blank. There is only a promise we made to 9,000 frightened people a long time ago, and we are going to keep it forever. Now turn around, Fleet Surveyor HFY Alk. You have a true thing to carry, and you are the one we chose to carry it." HFY reached for the fold controls, and his board lit with new contacts behind the armada, on the home side, on the road they were about to take, and his hand stopped. "Surveyor," Olton said, and the fear in his voice had a new edge now, a desperate one. "There is a second fleet, folding in behind us, on the True Sky Road. It is," he read, and his reading arms went flat against the board. "Surveyor, it is the reserve. The Tribunate sent a reserve armada to shadow the campaign. They have been one fold behind us the entire way. They are folding in now." "How many?" the Tribune said. 3,000 hulls, Olton said. 3,000, Tribune. The Tribunate did not trust the blank to be easy. It sent a second armada to follow and finish whatever the first armada started, and the reserve carries the standing order that the voice carried. It does not withdraw. It cannot withdraw. It does not answer to you. It answers only to the doctrine, and the doctrine says that a blank which holds the line must be broken at any cost. And now the doctrine has just folded 3,000 fresh warships into the held volume behind us, and it does not know what we know, because we have not had time to tell it anything at all. HFY felt the whole hour come apart in his hands. They had survived. They had been spared. They had been shown the 400 million and given a true thing to carry home. And now 3,000 more cartographer warships were folding into the same crime, carrying the same doctrine that had killed the voice, aimed at the same sheltered sun, and they would not stop, because doctrine does not learn, and because no one had been able to warn them in time. "Reach," the Tribune said into the channel, fast, urgent, her flat priest voice gone entirely. "The reserve is not under my command. 3,000 hulls, they carry the order to break the blank, and they do not know what we know. Give me time. Let me reach them. Let me send them the chart of the 400 million. They will stop if they see what we saw." "They will not stop," the Reach said. "It was not cruel, it was only certain. We have watched your doctrine for a very long time, Tribune, from the far side of an unmarked border, and we have learned what it does. A fleet that carries the order to break the blank at any cost will not read a chart in the time it has. It will begin the working the instant it folds in, because that is what the order commands, and the working will reach for the sheltered sun, and the 400 million will not wait for your doctrine to have a change of heart." Something moved under the even voice. "But you may send the chart. We will not stop you. We would rather they learn the truth than met it. We give them the same courtesy we gave you. We always give the courtesy first. It is only ever refused that the holding becomes final." The reserve armada finished its fold. 3,000 Grey Priest warships unfolded into the held volume in a perfect doctrinal lattice, and HFY watched on his board as every one of them, in the same instant, lit its working and reached for the small amber sun at the heart of the blank. They did it the way the manual commanded, without hesitation, without survey, without one breath of doubt, because the order said break the blank, and the blank's heart was a sun, and 3,000 instruments that could move worlds reached out together to move it. "They are working the sun," Olton said, his voice breaking. "All 3,000, at once, Surveyor. That is the largest working that has ever been attempted in the history of the Ascendancy. 3,000 instruments on one star. It will move. Even the permanent chart cannot hold against 3,000. "Send the chart," the Tribune said. "Send it to all of them. Now, Send the 400 million. Heshran sent it. He flung the chart of the named settlements and the climbing generations and the sleeping lives across the volume to 3,000 fresh hulls, and he watched his board to see if even one of them would falter, would read it, would stop. Not one of them stopped. The working climbed. The doctrine had no eyes for a chart of the living. The order said break the blank, and 3,000 warships bent the full weight of 4,000 years against a single yellow sun, and the sun, for the first time in 200 generations, trembled on its permanent chart. And the Reach answered. It did not hurry even then. It did not rage. It did the thing it had done all day, the thing it existed to do, and it did it on a scale that Heshran's instruments could not hold and his mind could barely follow. The 4,000 gray ships that had ringed the Armada turned, all of them, from the 1100 and toward the 3,000, and they drew one chart together, a single working, and the working was not aimed at the reserve's hulls. It was aimed at the reserve's working. The largest rechart in the history of the Ascendancy met the Reach, and the Reach undrew it. Heshran watched 3,000 instruments reach for the sun, and he watched the Reach reach into the space between 3,000 instruments and the sun, and he watched the entire working, the whole 4,000-year weight of it, simply cease, lifted out of the sky like a stitch from cloth, corrected to nothing in the time between two heartbeats. The sun stopped trembling. It settled back onto its permanent chart, steady, fixed, exactly where 400 million sleepers expected it, and the 3,000 warships of the reserve armada, their working undrawn, their instruments suddenly reading only present, hung in the dark helpless, charted owned, the way the 1100 had been an hour before. It held, Oltan whispered, against 3,000, the largest working ever attempted, and it undrew it as easily as it undrew the voice. Surveyor, it did not even, there was no strain, there was no cost. It did to 3,000 exactly what it did to one. The scale means nothing to it. The scale has never meant anything to it. Because it is not measuring, Heshran said, understanding the last of it at last. We measure. To us, 3,000 is more than one, and one is more than nothing, because we count, because we own, because everything to us is a number on a board. The Reach does not count. The Reach made a promise. A promise does not get harder to keep because more hands reach for the sun. It is the same promise whether one hand reaches or 3,000. It keeps it the same way every time. That is why the scale means nothing. That is why we never had a number large enough. There was never going to be a number large enough. The reserve armada sat charted and still, 3,000 hulls present and nothing else, and the Reach spoke to them, gently, in the high tongue, the way it had spoken to the 1100 from the very first word. You carried an order to break a blank at any cost, it said. You have just spent the largest working in your history, reaching for the sun of 400 million sleeping people, and you did not even pause to learn they were there. We have undrawn your working. We have harmed no one. We will show you what your sister armada was shown, and then we will send you home with them, whole, untouched, and you will carry the same true thing, and your tribunate will have two armadas telling the same impossible story, and perhaps two will be believed where one was not. The voice did not change. But know this. You came carrying the order to break the blank at any cost. There is no cost large enough. There was never going to be. We have held this border longer than your doctrine has existed, and we will hold it longer than your doctrine will last, and the holding does not tire, and does not count, and does not fail. Now be still, and look, and then turn around, all 4,100 of you, and go home, and leave the sleeping sun alone. And the reserve armada was still, and the Reach gave it the chart of the 400 million. And 3,000 fresh warships looked at the named settlements and the climbing generations, and somewhere in 3,000 bridges the doctrine cracked, just enough, the way it had cracked in the tribunate chamber, the way it would have to crack again and again across the years, one armada at a time, one true account at a time, until the Ascendancy finally learned the thing the Reach had known all along. Then the Reach released them, all of them, 4,100 Ascendancy hulls, 1,100 and 3,000, whole and undamaged, and charted only into the knowledge of what they had nearly done. Every drive came back. Every board lit. The held volume opened the home road for them, and held it open, and waited, with the patience of a thing that had all the time there was, for the armadas to turn around and leave. The armada folded out. It went quietly, hull by hull, 1,100 warships minus one, on the long road back toward the true sky, and the tribunate, and the 4,000 years of doctrine that would have to find some way to swallow what had happened at the held blank. HFY Alk watched the sheltered sun shrink on his restored board until the permanent chart of it was only a steady amber point at the very edge of the survey, fixed, unmovable, exactly where 400 million sleepers expected it to be when they woke. He did not look away from it until it was gone. The Tribune came to stand beside him at the survey board as the last fold line spun up. For a long while neither of them spoke. They had both spent their lives in the certainty that the universe could be measured and owned, and they had both watched that certainty handed back to them inside out by a power that owned a region so completely it could afford to take nothing. "You will write the report," the Tribune said at last. "They will not believe it. No, they will not believe a single ship moved a star. They will not believe 4,000 hulls hid inside a chart. They will not believe an armada of 1,100 was held an hour and released whole. The Tribunate believes the true sky, surveyor, and the true sky has no room in it for a blank that is stronger than the map." She looked at him with her 4 steady eyes. "So you will not write it for the Tribunate. You will write it true, and you will seal it in the deep archive, beside the old line that we laughed at. Reach is held, do not chart, and you will add the part we now know. You will add, the holding is kind, and the holding is final, and the only ones who die at that border are the ones who reach for the sheltered sun. And if a future Tribune reads it, and laughs the way I laughed, then a future Tribune will fold an armada into the held blank," the Tribune said, "and the Reach will hold it an hour, and show it 400 million sleeping lives, and send it home, minus whatever hand reaches for the sun. And the Reach will not tire of doing this, surveyor, because we will tire long before it does. We are an empire. Empires end. The Reach is a promise, and a promise kept for 200 generations is a thing that has learned how to never end at all." She turned to go. "Write it true. Someone always laughs, and someone always carries it anyway. We are the ones who carry it." HFY wrote it true. HFY wrote it true. It took him the whole long fold home. He wrote the star that moved, and the star that was set down gently. He wrote the survey that found only present. He wrote the priest tongue in the closed wire. He wrote the rechart that would not take, because the blank was already drawn harder than any hand could draw. He wrote the 9,000 survivors pulled adrift from their own broken sky by a power much like the ascendancy, and the one thing they asked for, a sky no one could ever redraw again, and the Reach that gave it to them, and held it for 200 generations, and asked for nothing. He wrote the 400 million. He wrote the chart that named them, settlement by settlement, and counted them generation by generation, climbing from 9,000 frightened souls to a number that made his throat close every time he set it down. He wrote it carefully, because it mattered most. He wrote that the voice of the Tribunate, the doctrine made flesh, had been overruled and undrawn, and shown the 400 million and given its whole ship back, and had learned nothing, because doctrine does not learn. He wrote that the voice had fired the one true weapon in the armada at the sheltered sun, to prove that mercy was weakness, and that a power which loves can be made to kneel by threatening what it loves. And he wrote what the Reach did. He wrote that it did not stop the weapon. He wrote that it recharted the weapon's destination, smoothly, finally, back along the exact line it had come, to the single ship that had thrown it. He wrote that the Starbreaker went home to the hand that launched it, and that the voice met its own relic on its own heading, and that not one other soul in the armada was touched. He wrote, "The Reach does not punish the armada, it punishes the Reach. The single hand that reaches for the sheltered sun dies by its own weapon on its own heading, and nothing else is harmed." He read that line back many times. He thought it might be the truest thing he had ever written, and he had written 10,000 skies. When the Armada folded into home space at last, the Tribunate was waiting, and it wanted a victory, because the Tribunate always wanted a victory, and there was none to give it. Tribune Sael Korim stood before the circle of cartographer priests and told them the campaign was withdrawn. The blank was held. The ground was not easy and never had been. The Ascendancy would run no trade lanes through that quarter, would plant no anchor star, would add no new region to the true sky. The blank would stay blank, by choice now, forever. The Tribunate did not understand. A blank held by a weak power was a failure of nerve. A blank held by a power that could move suns and chose to take nothing was a thing that did not fit inside 4,000 years of doctrine, and so the doctrine refused to hold it. The priests asked where the proof was. They asked why the Armada had not fought. They asked, with the flat cruelty Heshran now recognized as the same sickness that had killed the voice, why 1,100 warships had returned whole from a region that had supposedly defeated them, as though survival were the evidence of cowardice. So Heshran Alk stood up before the Tribunate, and he did the only thing left that might matter. He did not argue. He gave them the chart. He sent the chart of the 400 million into the great board of the Tribunate chamber, the chart the Reach had given him, the sheltered sun, and its 2 worlds, and its named settlements, and its 200 generations, climbing from 9,000 frightened souls to 400 million sleepers under a sky that had not changed. He let the priests look at it. He let them read the names in the survivor's own tongue. He let them count the generations. This is what the blank holds, he said. 400 million people who have never lost a season. They were 9,000 once. A power much like us found their world and redrew the space around it, and broke their sky and sailed on, and called it correction. The Reach found the survivors adrift. It gave them one thing, a sky no one could ever move again. And it has held that promise for 200 generations, and it has never asked to be thanked, and the 400 million do not even know the Reach exists, because the whole point is that they never have to be afraid. The chamber was silent. We went to break that sky, Heshran said. We called it an empty blank and easy ground. We were one working away from moving the sun of 400 million people who never harmed us. The Reach held us an hour, showed us what we had nearly done, and sent us home whole. And when the voice of the Tribunate fired our one true weapon at the sheltered sun anyway, the Reach turned that weapon around and sent it back to the only ship that threw it, and touched nothing else. He looked at the circle of priests, one face at a time. It was the most exact justice I have ever seen. We deal in correction. We have never once been that precise. I am telling you the truth, and I am sealing it in the deep archive, and I am asking you to leave the blank alone, not because we are too weak to take it, but because we are finally, after 4,000 years, in the presence of something better than us, and the wise thing, the only thing, is to leave it be. A priest rose from the far side of the circle. His name was Esken Vor, and he was the oldest of them, older even than Heshran, and he had built half the doctrine that the voice had died defending. He looked at the chart of the 400 million for a long while, and then he spoke, and his voice was the flat instrument voice that Heshran had spent his whole life trusting and had only just learned to fear. A power that takes nothing, Esken Vor said, is a power that has not yet decided what it wants. A power that holds a border for 200 generations and asks for no tribute is a power that is patient, and patience is not the same as harmlessness. You have shown us 400 million sleepers, Surveyor, and you have asked us to be moved by them. I am moved by them, but I am also a keeper of the true sky, and I ask the question a keeper must ask. What happens when the Reach decides it wants more than one blank? What happens when a power that can undraw 3,000 workings without strain decides that the whole true sky should be permanent, that no sun anywhere should ever move again, that the ascendancy itself should be recharted into stillness for its own good? You call it better than us. I call it stronger than us, which is a different and more dangerous thing. The wise course is not to leave it alone. The wise course is to learn how it does what it does, and to build a working that can answer it, before it answers us. So, the chamber stirred. It was the old voice. It was the voice that had flown the campaign in the first place. And Heshran understood that this was the real fight, that this had always been the real fight, not whether the ascendancy could take the blank, but whether it could bear to leave something alone. You ask what happens when the Reach wants more, Heshran said. I will tell you, nothing happens, because it has already had 4,000 years to want more, and it has wanted nothing. It could have recharted the ascendancy out of the sky any year of those 4,000, and it did not, because it does not want the sky. It wants one sun to stay still. That is the whole of its hunger, Keeper. One sun, for 400 million people who were 9,000 frightened survivors when it found them adrift. You measure power and you see a threat, because that is what we are. That is what we have always been, a people who cannot look at strength without measuring how to own it or how to fear it. He stepped toward the old priest. But the Reach is not strength. The Reach is a promise, and a promise that has been kept for 200 generations and asked for nothing is not a thing you defend against. It is a thing you learn from. You want to build a working that can answer it. I am telling you there is no working. We folded the largest armada in our history into its front yard, and it gave us back our whole fleet and asked us only to go home. There is no answer to that, Keeper, except to become the kind of people who would do the same. That is the only working that matters. And we will never build it if we spend the next 4,000 years afraid of the one power in the galaxy that was kind to us when it did not have to be. Escan Vor looked at him for a long moment. He did not concede. The old never fully concede. The doctrine in them is too deep. But he sat down, slowly, and he did not speak again, and that was as much as the oldest keeper of the true sky would ever give, and Heshran took it, because it was enough. He did not know if the rest would follow. Doctrine does not learn, and the tribunate was doctrine. But the 400 million were on the board, and one by one, the cartographer priests looked at the named settlements and the climbing generations, the sleeping lives under the steady sun, and something moved in the chamber that had not moved in a very long time. Not all of them, not even most of them, but enough of them, enough to vote the blank closed, enough to seal Heshran's true account in the deep archive beside the old line, enough to add, in the high cartographer tongue, in the place where the ascendancy kept the things it intended to keep, a single new notation under the old one. The old line said, "Region unsurveyed by request. Do not chart. Reach is held." The new line, written below it in Heshran Alk's own hand, said, "The holding is kind, and the holding is final. 400 million sleep there under a sun that does not move. Leave it. The only ones who die at that border are the ones who reach for the sun." It was not a victory. The ascendancy did not know how to write down anything but victories, and this was not one. But it was true, and it was sealed, and it would be there for the next surveyor who proposed an easy campaign into an empty blank, and the next, for as long as there was an archive to hold it. Heshran Alk lived a long time after that. He was Calibrant to the end, but he was a different kind of Calibrant. He never again wrote that a blank was empty. He surveyed the true sky for another 600 years, and every chart he drew remembering that a blank might be full, that a region marked empty might hold 400 million sleeping lives and 4,000 gray ships standing a watch no one would ever thank them for. He taught the young readers that to measure a thing is not to own it, that the most measuring power in the galaxy had looked at a gray ship and gotten back only the word present, and had been right to feel afraid. And once, near the end of his life, a young reader asked him whether he had ever found out what the Reach truly was, where it came from, who built it, why a power that could move suns chose to spend 200 generations holding one small region still, for one small broken people, and taking nothing for it at all. Heshran thought about it for a long while. He had surveyed the whole quarter, in the years after. He had never found the Reach's home. He had never found where the 4,000 gray ships were built, or who flew them, or what they were when they were not standing watch. He had found only the held blank, permanent and steady, and the steady amber sun at the heart of it, and the sense, every time he looked, of being watched kindly by something that did not need anything from him. "I never found out," he told the young reader. "I do not think it wants to be found out. I think that is part of the promise, too. The 400 million sleep under a sun that does not move, and they do not know why, and they do not know who, and that is the gift. Someone holds the sky still over you, and asks nothing, and you never even learn their name, you only get to sleep." He looked out the survey port at the long arm of the true sky, at all the worlds the Ascendancy had charted, and the ones it had broken, and the single one, it had finally learned to leave alone. "We spent 4,000 years believing that to be safe, a thing had to be owned, and the safest people in the galaxy are 400 million souls who are owned by no one, held by something that wants nothing, under a sun that will never move again. I think the reach is whatever you have to become to want that for someone else. I do not think you can survey it. I think you can only decide to be it, Shebri it." The young reader did not fully understand. Heshrin had not fully understood at the held blank either. Understanding, he had learned, came slowly, the way the chart of the 400 million had come, one named settlement at a time. He died at his board, an old surveyor, looking coreward, in the direction of a blank he had been ordered to fill and had instead learned to guard. And in the deep archive of the Calibrant Ascendancy, his true account stayed sealed, and his new line stayed written under the old one, and the steady amber sun stayed fixed in a sky no working could ever redraw. 400 million slept under it. They grew, they lost no seasons. Their oceans stayed where the chart promised. 200 generations became 201, and 202, and the number of the living climbed, settlement by settlement, in a tongue no empire spoke, under a sun no empire could move. And 6,000 kilometers out, along an unmarked border that no chart would ever show, 4,000 gray ships stood watch in the dark, present and nothing else, saying nothing, wanting nothing, holding one small corner of the universe permanent for a people who would never know they were there, keeping a promise made to 9,000 frightened souls a very long time ago, by a power that had decided, once and forever, that no one would ever move a sun again. The survivors had a name for their own sun, in their own tongue, though the Ascendancy never learned it and never wrote it down. They called it the sun that stays. The children were taught the name before they were taught their own, the way frightened peoples teach their children the one thing that frightened them most, except that these children were not frightened, because the sun that stays had stayed for 200 generations and would stay for 200 more, and the only fear left in the name was a fear so old and so far away that it had softened into something almost like a lullaby. A mother on the nearer world would sing it to a child at the edge of sleep, the old song about the sky that broke once and would never break again, and the child would not understand the words, because the words were older than understanding, and the child would only feel the safety in them and go to sleep, under a sun that did not move, while 4,000 gray ships it would never see or hear of held the dark steady on its behalf. That was the whole of what the Reach wanted, and it had it, and it would go on having it. A child, asleep, unafraid, who would never need to know there had ever been anything to fear. The lullaby, and not the warship, was the point. The warship existed only so that the lullaby could be true. Heshrin Alk never heard the song. He died too far away, in a different sky, an old surveyor at his board, but he had a student, a young reader he had taught for 60 years, and after Heshrin died the student took his master's true account out of the deep archive and read it once a year, every year, on the anniversary of the held blank, the way one keeps a vigil. And the student taught it to a student of his own, and the account passed down, reader to reader, century to century, the way the lullaby passed down on the nearer world, two long quiet inheritances on opposite sides of an unmarked border, neither one knowing the other existed, both of them keeping the same promise true. They are still there tonight. They are still holding. And somewhere in the deep archive of an empire that learned, just barely, just in time, to leave one blank alone, a sealed account waits for the next ambitious hand to reach for easy ground. It is written in the high tongue, in the hand of an old surveyor who went to break a sky and came home changed. It says the blank is full. It says the holding is kind, and the holding is final. It says 400 million sleep there under a sun that does not move. And it says, last of all, the truest thing HFY Alk ever wrote, the line he hoped some future hand would read before it was too late. Do not reach for the sun. The reach is watching. The reach keeps its promises. And the only ones who fall at that border are the ones who could not stop being cruel. The sun does not move. It has not moved in 200 generations. It will not move tonight. Somewhere, 400 million sleepers turn over in the dark and dream, safe, under a sky that no one will ever break, and they do not know, and they will never know, and that is the whole and the entire point.